The first half here was just getting us warmed up. Now we're going to get into some of the meat of this whole topic. And how many of you thought the first part was a little too geeky? Few people. Okay, if we'll try to keep it down so that everybody can understand what's being discussed here. To start off with, I'd like to have each of the panelists give just a short 2-minute introductions of themselves and what they're doing right now. David Jilk is the CEO of Standing Cloud. So David, if you could just give a quick overview of what all you're involved in.
Is my cloud microphone working? Yeah. Okay. Right, so I started Standing Cloud about 2 years ago, and I've actually run a number of web and internet software companies over the last decade or so. Interestingly enough, I also have a software company called eCortex, which does some of the AI stuff that Rich was talking about earlier. So I was enjoying your take on it.
All right. John Sheehan is the developer evangelist for Twilio.
Yeah, so my name is John Sheehan. I work for a company called Twilio. They're based in San Francisco, and they provide a telephony API that runs on Amazon's cloud currently. It basically provides infinite telephony resources accessed in a way that any web developer can build powerful telephony apps. So I live and work in Broomfield, so that's why I'm here.
All right. And then Joe Wappler is the founding systems architect for Standing Cloud. Joe, if you could give us just a brief overview of what you're involved in.
Hi, I'm Joel Wampler. I actually work with Dave at Standing Cloud, and I've been there for 2 years now too, one of the co-founders, and we're just putting together new technologies in the cloud and seeing how far we can take it.
All right. Well, let's start off with a few questions here. I know as a kid growing up, my dad always told me that when I was driving somewhere, I should have a toolbox in the car in case something broke down on the car, I could fix it. I really wasn't interested in knowing that much about cars. I wanted to go from point A to point B. We seem to be in that toolbox stage of cloud computing, and we have to know way more about it than most people want to know about it. How long before we get to the point where we can just do things without having to know so much about it? That's kind of an open-ended question.
Well, we've been doing it for longer than you think already, because if you use Google Apps, for example, if you use the Gmail or Google Docs, then you've been using the cloud for however long you've been using that. And Salesforce.com, when did they start? That's been 8 years now or something like that, and it's been quite a while. And so that is all legitimately considered cloud computing, because you don't own or control or manage any of the resources, the computing resources. Yeah. So they make it easy. You don't need to really know anything other than the software itself. Versus the kind of cloud that Rich was talking about primarily. You talked about all of it, but Rich was emphasizing infrastructure as a service, which you have to know at least as much as you did if you bought a box and installed it. You don't have to know as much about the hardware, but you have to know everything about the software. So it partly depends on the kind of cloud computing you're using.
Yeah, even with Gmail, though, you get to a point where you're using up too much storage, then you have to pay for extra storage at Google. It's not seamless. There's a pain threshold that's still not as easy as driving a car today. So.
But he's right that we're definitely getting close. Like if you look at Heroku, that Rich mentioned, Heroku takes all the hassle out of hosting. You don't have to even know anything besides your web framework, which is a really high-level programming thing that millions of web developers already know. They don't have to know about maintaining the servers or configuring the servers or how to tune a server for Ruby or what the best, Ruby deployment system is. It's basically you push your source code and it runs, and so that's done. And like another example, at Twilio, we've taken telephony, which is extremely complicated, and you have to, there's a whole different network there besides the internet. There's a lot of upfront carrier negotiations and codecs and SIP and all this other stuff. And we've hidden all that, and we just made it as simple as HTTP web requests. It's get and post. It's what every web developer does every day of their life. When you submit a form, you send a post request. If you know how to program that, then you can start making and receiving phone calls using Twilio. So I think we're starting to broach the part of the cloud where you don't need to know as much. And those two companies, illustrate that. And eventually we'll get beyond even better, or beyond developers being able. You won't have to be a developer at all to do these things. And I think we're starting to see, the first steps in that direction.
Yeah. Joel, did you want to?
Well, I think a lot of companies that are innovating today are actually working on that exact problem. They're trying to make the cloud easier, even if it's Google Apps, and there's companies out there making add-on products for it and things like that that make it easier to use, or add a function or a feature that it doesn't currently have. And a lot of companies are out there looking at the cloud, and it's still in its infancy, and a lot of infrastructure as a service type things, and people are building upon it, and we're pretty close to seeing all those come to fruition, I think.
So what percentage of the population out there understands what the cloud is today?
Very little.
Very little.
I would say very little. I don't know what the percentage is, but in even today, you have Microsoft out there with their to the cloud message, and a lot of times that confuses things. Everything's in the cloud according to them, and even using the internet is the cloud. So, or software on your computer.
Verio did a study last summer. Verio, the big hosting company, and they found that 72% of small to medium-sized business owners, which is their main customer base, thought that they knew the same or less about the cloud than they did a year before. So people are unlearning, which I think Microsoft has contributed a lot to that. But.
All right.
So part of that is because it's becoming, people are imposing on that term anything they can get.
It's called cloud washing.
Yeah, so you do know less because people claim it's more, even if it really isn't.
All right. Question here?
Yeah, linked to that same question, though, also how much do you think of the toolbox? You talked about carrying the toolbox around. How much do you think that that's being maintained, that situation being maintained by the commercial model linked to the cloud? Because clearly the commercial model is still to be resolved properly, it's an ongoing thing, and we all have a tendency to think in the past, so we still like to price things the way that we used to understand it, and we need to price it that way because that's the way the consumer understands it. So as a consequence, you're sort of explaining to the consumer what you're buying, but you're putting it in old language, if you know what I mean. So if you hide it, you sort of struggle to justify the cost of it.
Yes. Okay. Figuring out what you're selling and how you sell it and how you price it, not just how much it is, but how you organize all that is very hard. We struggle with that too. And you can make it, so that they can be efficient, and then you can't explain it, or you can explain it simply, and then they won't understand why it's.
Yeah, and I guess along the same lines of pricing models, prior to Amazon EC2 being available, you couldn't sell a service like Twilio with no upfront costs and then 3 cents per minute and 2 cents per text message, because you had that upfront cost that you had to recoup right away. So you'd take what you spent and you'd divide it up, and then you'd start selling people that until you broke even at some point, and then try to figure out how to reprice it. But we just said, we're only paying this much per text message. We don't have to do anything extra to spin up capacity until we need it. So then when that happens, we've already got it built in. We just know what our per text message unit price is basically from the start without having to make any upfront costs.
Well, my question is, it's kind of a comment on what you just said. How do you know it's going to be the same price going forward? Because you're saying your tweets cost whatever, or your text message costs whatever. You're not in control of that anymore. The person that's providing that is. So where's your guarantee on keeping that cost zero or low?
Well, there's no guarantees. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's been a pretty good guarantee, or pretty reliable, that the cost is going down on computing power. If you see, like Amazon has lowered their prices on EC2 over time, and we've actually done the same to mirror that. As it becomes more of a commodity, the prices go down, and we've just kind of ridden along on that wave. And maybe that won't always be the case, but it's been working so far.
Okay, other questions?
I always bump up against problems with, it was either oversold, and then I can't get support to do what I'm trying to do, or the people supporting it, have no idea what's going on and can't solve my problems. So what's the future hold? What's the industry doing to deal with that problem in the cloud?
Well, that is a tough question, and there's companies like Rackspace that their whole mantra is fanatical support. So there's different cloud companies and providers that you can actually choose that may help you for your specific support needs. Rackspace includes the support. You don't have to pay extra for it. You can usually get a hold of somebody pretty quickly and things like that. Whereas Amazon, you actually have to pay for it, or try your luck in the then it's horrible then, or try your luck in the forums, and things like Google Apps and even any of the Google services. Google is horrible at actual end user support. They don't even provide it really. So I think it'll be interesting to see if those companies start stepping up in the support realm, and there's other companies that are popping up to help in those areas too. So back to the first question, where there's other companies that are innovating in this area, and they're creating services that are much easier, and they're going to provide support on the infrastructures and things like that for you.
So that your question is basically what I asked myself about 8 months ago or 9 months ago when I started this company, and that's actually a service that we provide as well. And you'll find other folks, doing this. Is that I basically virtualize myself and the consultants that work for me. So, our customers don't have to pay for 100% of us. They only need us, 15% of the time for 2 months to, while they've got a big campaign or something. I think you're going to start seeing that, as well as you're going to have consultants that you work through to know your systems really well and to give you the advice that you need.
There's another issue with support in terms of how you ask the question, because it's what layer are you asking for support, or at what layer are you asking for support? So back in the day, people used to have Novell NetWare running on local area networks, and there was no internet, right? And you needed a guy who can come in and fix your broken computers and wash the keyboard off from the coffee and whatever else they did, right? And they had to help you back up your server. So that was a level of support that we just simply don't need in the cloud anymore, because they're all first of all, you don't even see the bare hardware; you only see virtual machines. And then, one of the things that Standing Cloud has done, and other companies like us, is we try to take another layer away from that, where the fact that machines are so easy to start up and shut down. If something is going wrong with a virtual machine, you don't try to fix it. You just throw it away and you start a new one. And so, it's on Rackspace, it's $0.015 an hour for a virtual machine. So why would I even think about doing anything manually on that? So instead, I make sure I have the right kinds of backups and all that. So you can actually eliminate a lot of support at the lower levels of the equation, and then the support where it's really needed is at the application layer, where more complex applications. Now that's not true for a startup, where if you're building a startup system and you've got a complex application with lots of different servers and they're all interconnected in unusual ways, then you're going to need a systems person. You're going to need your own Joel, because you're not going to find that virtualized. Or Rich, I guess you guys do the same kinds of things. So
I think the future of support is people, really. Companies will use it as a differentiator, and they'll find people that are better at providing support, and you will go to that company because you get better support. So when all the prices at all the cloud providers are the same, because cost of processing has come down, cost of network has come down, they'll start using things like support as a differentiator to stand out from their competitors.
Okay, we've got a question from our live webcast listener, Scott. What are the best analytics if I'm not satisfied with my vendor? And the basic question of how do I get my data back before I can work with a new vendor?
I would guess he's asking, when he says analytics, I'd guess he's asking traffic, sort of Google Analytics kind of data.
Yeah. How do you determine who a good vendor would be?
Well, there's really only a couple that I know of, and of course, Google Analytics is there. Web Trends is the other big player, and then after that, it starts getting into a sort of, they own like 80% of the space. Really, I think you're kind of limited to one of those two. Do you guys?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So who's doing
web analytics? there used to be a dozen companies or maybe 50 companies that did that. Omniture and Website Story and all those guys.
Once it's out there, how do you know?
Right. So that's another possible question that could be asked. And there are New Relic and I forget the names of all the companies that do that. There's a bunch of companies doing monitoring. But really, is monitoring any different in the cloud than anywhere else? And the answer is not that much. So all the usual providers, all the usual suspects will be in there as well, Quest and CA and those guys.
So who's doing the Consumer Reports version of analyzing who the good vendors are in the cloud?
Well, that kind of analysis, like vendor analysis, like who
Yeah.
are the vendors? Again, you've pretty much got your choices are your local data center, who you may have a relationship with that's virtualized, or Amazon or Rackspace, or to a lesser extent, GoGrid. And really, those are the four companies out there after that.
If you're looking for the consumer reports of cloud providers, it doesn't exist. Somebody go build it. Because that would be a really valuable service, actually.
Okay.
If you could do it in an objective way.
So there's a good opportunity waiting to happen.
If that's the question, then there are a bunch of blogs out there, and people have done studies of various performance aspects. There was a study that came out about load balancing performance on the different major IaaS providers. There's I forget the name of it, but there's a good blog on this guy basically just loves testing all the performance levels of these different systems. So if you Google it, you can find blog posts on performance aspects of the different cloud services. But it's complex, right? And, Amazon, it fluctuates all over the place, even in the course of a minute. And so it's not an easy thing to measure consistently.
So is there any difficulty getting your data back from one cloud provider and transitioning it to another cloud provider?
I think the hardest part with that is actually migrating the characteristics of your environment rather than the data. So the data is yours, you'll be able to get that off, but if you have 2 load balancers with 3 servers and a MySQL with a slave and all this on the back end, and that performs decent for you, trying to mirror that environment in a different provider is going to be the hardest part. That's going to be the hardest part to get reset up or reconfigured somewhere else.
Okay.
But then again, like Dave was mentioning previously, there's monitoring tools that you can use, and you can actually do, a point-and-click sort of walkthrough of your site, and have it, watching using tools like Selenium or Browser Mob or these other tools, have it sort of make a test case of how your site should run, and then you migrate to the other cloud provider, and you run that test case over there. And if things don't function in the same way, at least you've got a big indicator that something went wrong. And you can, these things you can automate them to crawl over your entire site and so forth.
Do we have any other questions here?
Rich, so you mentioned a couple of reasons why you might want to not migrate to the cloud right now. I guess what do you see as the big reasons right now to not migrate to the cloud? And do you see any of those reasons sticking around, or how do you see them changing in the future?
Sure. I think that the big thing out there is security. If you have user data that's really sensitive, or if you want control over the data, and that's never going to go away. To the extent of I'm just going to give it to somebody, you might start seeing, folks come up, and even your local data center might start, offering you a little sort of private cloud that you don't have to build yourself. And many data centers already do this, but they will tell you, you have rack number 26, server number 16, and you can go in there and make sure that it's physically secure and all that stuff. I would think that's the biggest thing, is security is not going to change.
Well, so I have a little different take on security. So first of all, and by the way, Joel is our technical expert on this, but I've learned some of this from him. First of all, security in the cloud, in terms of the actual security, is really not that different than it is anywhere else. In other words, the issues that you need to address on a cloud server and cloud storage are the same. And most of the holes, the security holes, are in the application software, not on the server. And so there's something of a fallacy that it's less safe in the cloud. It's actually, in some ways, it's more safe because depending on how you've done the work, because if you've used professionals to lock down the servers, it's probably more locked down than if you're running the application from your own data center. The kinds of security holes that relate specifically to virtualization in cloud are so obscure and so difficult to actually make work that, and it's not even clear that they even exist. So that's not an issue. The real issue, and Rich alluded to this in his talk, is there are regulatory issues depending on the kind of data you're storing. So if you're in the UK or in the Eurozone, you actually aren't allowed to store certain types of identifying information in the United States because of the Patriot Act. If you're storing medical records or medical information, you can't put that on there because cloud doesn't conform. Cloud services do not conform to the rules. The rules were written a decade ago before anybody was doing virtualization. Very similar for PCI for credit card information, and there are a few other categories like that. So it's really more about that piece is more about the rules than it is about the actual security. So it's a kind of a complex question. Joel, do you probably have something to add to that?
Actually, you covered it pretty well, but
like I said, I learned a lot from it.
As a follow-up, do you see those rules changing? Are people working on that
To ask again for the radio, for the...
I don't predict the behavior of bureaucracies.
Though there is a trend that they do eventually seem to catch up. Eventually, it lags, right? Like it took forever for, like Amazon EC2 is now PCI compliant, right? But that took a long time. I mean, they've been in their service for a long time. I imagine they've been working on this since they first started, but it is there now. So I think I shouldn't predict the bureaucracies. That's a good philosophy. I'm going to use that now. But I think eventually they'll get there. I'm not going to put a date on it, though.
I think some of the technologies that will help are things like full disk encryption and things like that, where the current level of processor power in the virtualization is probably not there yet to make that performance ready. But as we move forward and the processors get faster, you'll be able to encrypt your own virtual disk, and then most of the problems of sharing your virtual environment with other people will go away.
Okay, another question here.
Okay, the kind of following on these comments is that I'm trying to grasp what to do. For example, what we are doing, we are becoming more efficient, but at the same time, we are becoming more efficient, and we are just waiting for a black swan, like Taleb said on his book. We are waiting for a black swan where we don't know what it could happen. We are becoming so efficient with the cloud that we are putting all our data right there, but how to protect ourselves about something like that uncertainty, like we lose all the data, we lose the network connection. What do you think, how we can do it? What we can do at the hybrid, we can have a private cloud and also the public cloud and divide the data between the two systems. That's my take.
I don't think the challenge of data integrity or data protection is any different in the cloud than it was prior to that. There's steps you have to take to mitigate your risk, and now the cloud maybe offers some additional options to further geo-separate. Is that a word? It is not. To geo-separate your data, and but the same type of disaster planning and risk mitigation steps still need to be considered. Like the cloud doesn't excuse you from protecting your data.
I also think that configuration tools will become much more important. So configuration management tools, if you're in the cloud and you used configuration management tools to set up your environments and things like that, as long as you have control of your data and you're backing that up elsewhere, if that entire cloud infrastructure goes away, if that's what you're worried about, using these configuration management tools, you could easily move your stuff or get back going again fairly quickly. As long as you have your data, that would be the important thing.
Well, and if you've ever seen a company where their internet connection goes down, especially if they use Google Apps and some Gmail and whatever, I mean, work just stops. And in about 15 minutes, everybody figures that they need to have those meetings that they were planning on having anyway, and they get something done. But it really is a big productivity killer when you lose your internet connection. But one of the things you see now is that everybody's got a mobile phone and they're checking their email on their phone now, if the internet connection's down. Or I remember on one occasion you whipped out your MiFi, the little Verizon Wi-Fi device that goes over the cell network, and it's slow, but you could get work done. So these kinds of unique risks can be mitigated by redundancy, just like they always are.
Okay.
What do you see as the impact of the cloud on the government, maybe with the exception of service?
Well, Rich alluded to it in his talk that Vivek Kundra, who's the CIO of the U.S., has a huge initiative. In fact, they now have a cloud-first policy, that they have to look at any new initiatives, they have to look at using cloud solutions. When the government says cloud, they mean private cloud, private government cloud. They don't mean, Amazon EC2. And I think they're in the process of building, like most major organizations are doing, they're virtualizing a lot of their infrastructure with VMware or similar technologies. And so they're putting things on virtual machines. Whether they ever use the public cloud or not, I don't know what the prediction is for that.
Yeah, I mean, they are a huge consumer, I believe, right now of Amazon, of EC2. And that was, a lot of folks theorized that's why Amazon perhaps dropped WikiLeaks as a client, because the government, maybe there was some pressure being applied there. But yeah, and also the government is realizing they just somehow ended up stagnated for about 10 years there, and the whole rest of the world sort of passed them up. And now the CIO, Vivek Kundra, is going back in and saying, look, there's the cloud-first policy, as well as if there are services out there, if you're a fireman en route to put out a fire, what is wrong with pulling up Google Maps and seeing where the fire hydrant is before you get there? And they're starting to do stuff like that. They're starting to leverage, publicly available. Before there was a policy of like, you can't, we're a secure organization, we're going to, it's kind of like China, we're going to block all these, websites and all this other stuff. He's starting to open that back up and say, there's great tools out there, let's leverage those as well.
Oh, I want to tell an interesting story about politicians, and I'll try and extrapolate that into government. One of the most popular use cases for a phone system that any web developer can program, and that's infinitely scalable, is political campaigns. If you can imagine that, they come to us in October and they say, we want to call Arizona. Okay, who in Arizona would you like to call? We want everyone. We want to call Arizona today, on this day, and we want to talk to them. And so prior to that, they had to set up huge infrastructures, all the traditional non-cloud model. Now we just spin up the resource for them, they call it, they shut it down. They don't have to maintain that infrastructure between election cycles, that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that the last 2 elections have heavily used this from both parties. I'm hoping that they'll learn from that, and hopefully that once they get elected, then they'll also take this newfound knowledge of how we can do things to, that's really hoping for too much, but, a guy can wish.
And I think the online identity management is a huge piece of that. I can't go to a kiosk at the DMV and renew my license because they don't know if I'm me. When we get to that point where you can, it's, there's the privacy versus convenience thing. We're going to have to give up a little bit of privacy to get convenience back out and get these sort of devices that the government can, give us access to.
They've been slow to adopt some online technologies, but when they do adopt it, it's actually very powerful. You really don't have to go to government offices anywhere near as much as you used to. The Secretary of State's offices around the country are in pretty good shape, and records like county assessors records, you can look up, property tax or ownership or whatever, and those kinds of things. That's 10 years old or whatever, but that kind of progress, even if it's delayed a decade, does actually make a huge difference in efficiency for citizens.
So how long before we can totally stay away from the DMV? What's your best guess?
Get a bicycle, I guess, is the...
Okay.
Is there such a thing as a disconnected cloud computing concept or whatever? I've got issues, with clients that are outside of, internet connectivity. Where do I go with that? Is it just a matter of getting an internet connection to them, or are there some other solutions in a cloud concept to deal with that problem?
I guess I kind of don't understand the question. You're saying, is there a way I can access a disk without having
Yeah,
to
practical question is, I have people that are outside of, cell coverage, Wi-Fi coverage, any kind of, internet connectivity. Is there something in the world of cloud computing that is being done to deal with that population or that demographic or that?
You're going to need local storage then. That's your only thing. You're going to need a big, SIM card or a big SSD card in your local device. If I'm understanding your question right, how can your users get to their data? How can they get to their storage if they don't have network access? It has to be local. That's the only
Is the network access intermittent, or is it permanently disconnected?
Not permanent at the moment, anyway, unless there's some sort of satellite or something like that. You're
asking about improved connectivity then.
cloud computing that's disconnected from the internet. Is that true?
Sure, you can have a private cloud, so you could have a local data center that they're all connected to, and then they could virtualize and share resources among themselves. It's a smaller pool, right? I mean, the Earth is finite, so we have a pool of 7 billion people, and we can share the cloud, and they would have a smaller pool among which they could share the resources, but they would have to have a local virtualized data center.
You might also be able to look at something like the Pogo plug. The Pogo plug is a cloud-connected device that would sync data back and forth. And so if they had this device at home, if they could travel to some place that did have internet connectivity, they could sync up while they're there and then just take this device back home with them and then access, locally while they're at home or offline.
Okay, all of you obviously see big opportunities in the cloud computing arena. Now, when you first started, you had your visions as to how this could be sold to companies. How has that vision of going up to a company and say, hey, you really need to be in the cloud, how has that sales technique changed over the period of time from when you first started till today?
Well, that's not our sales pitch, though. Our sales pitch is we want to help you get stuff done, in the telephony realm, and this is just another tool available to you to accomplish that. So, I guess that's all I have to say about it. It's not really where we're coming from. We don't sell the cloud. We sell telephony problem solving that happens to use the cloud.
It took us a while, but we figured out the same thing. So, someone asked about what we call cloud washing earlier, and this idea that kind of now everything is the cloud makes it meaningless. And so really what you have to talk to people about is the benefits you can provide them. And I think they're intrigued and interested to find out that you're using cloud technologies to be able to provide those benefits, but that's kind of like, oh, that's interesting, not really the premise on which they're buying anything. So, what you sell is, for example, you can, with what we do, you can easily move from one place to another so that if your system is down, if your application is down, you can easily bring it back up right away versus traditional approaches to putting your application on the internet where if your server goes down, you kind of have to fix it first. And so that's the kind of a benefit that we'll talk about with people, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the cloud from their perspective. It's just reducing downtime.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely just ROI. Whoops, I should move. It's the ROI. That's if you tell a client, and we do this. We've seen this in our own studies. If we're migrating someone to the cloud, they can generally recoup their costs in about 6 or 7 months, and they're saving 50 to 70% after that. So, it's going to take a little while to recoup the cost of migrating your app to the cloud, but then after that, it's all gravy. You're just running solid, and folks understand math pretty good, so it's a bit of an easy sell.
So the one issue that keeps coming up in the cloud world is all the privacy issues. And I had a conversation last week with a CIO of a major retailer in the United States here. And what they're doing is they're actually taking signals from individual handheld devices, whether it's cell phones or other devices, and they're building profiles around them based on where the person is navigating through the store and what things they stop in front of spend the most time in front of, what colors they seem to like better. And they are actually doing some very creative stuff, and it creates enormous convenience. Now, when you talk about that to a lot of people, and they get scared to death because they know way too much about me. And if my kids are in there, my 6-year-old kid or my 8-year-old kid, is this reasonable? And so I keep coming back to this whole notion of, is there anybody out there that's actually creating this privacy bill of rights that individuals should have, certain inalienable rights to privacy, and where does that stop and start? Because it seems like everybody's schizophrenic. Everybody wants to have things. They want to be treated in a first-class manner. They want people to know everything about them and treat them like royalty. But at the same time, they don't want anybody to know anything about them. And so we can't have it both ways. Is that a question that makes sense?
that's a great question, and I actually misspoke earlier when I said security. I was actually talking about privacy. The kind of what you're talking about is, you know, I think the big thing is you opted in to have your GPS turned on your phone, and the app came up and said, we're going to track you and we're going to collect this kind of data about you, bullet pointed. And if you didn't read through that and really understand what it was and you just pushed OK, that's kind of you're bad. And if somebody's tracking you through the store and you know who you have with you, whether it's your wife or your kids or whoever, that's your onus, and you sort of own that. The problem is we're all sort of, you know, trained, some screen with a bunch of, you know, accept these terms of service. I'm never going to read this thing. Click, I go. We need to back out of that. When you're realizing this sort of data that you're exposing on yourself, you need to back out and actually read those bullet points. When your phone starts tracking you, or, you know, an app says, hey, we're going to use, you know, cookies on you to track you around the web, you need to understand what that means yourself. It's going to fall back on the individual to sort of maintain that. I think you're looking in the wrong place if you're looking for somebody else to sort of own that.
When I was in high school, Orwell's 1984 was one of my favorite books, and what we've come to is that we turn the telescreens on by choice. The government doesn't make us keep them on. We actually put them on and let everybody watch, and so I agree with you. You know, it's if you care, you should pay attention.
Well, whilst
there's ways to stop it from happening. I mean, not in the TSA line, but you know, in most of the other things.
Whilst I agree with that point, I think the way that it will potentially pan out, to answer your question, is that it'll be a factor of experiences over time. It's just like the Google doing the Street View work, where they're going around and they're either deliberately or inadvertently collecting passwords on people's Wi-Fis, and amazingly, they're also storing it. So people actually bring that to the attention, and eventually it gets into a legal discussion. And I think this will happen time after time, in various areas, maybe like the one that you actually just described in a store. Is that an invasion of people's privacy, or isn't it? And until we go through lots of cycles of those, I think it will take that amount of time to actually fix these things. I don't think any legislator is going to sit down somewhere and write a magic paper that's just going to resolve it.
And I may be completely wrong with what I'm about to say, but I think everybody's got a price on their privacy. If it's worth it to you to give up your privacy, then you will. So I think over time we'll see more, you know, of this exchange where it'll be more visible. You will give us this information, and we will provide this value back to you. Like, my threshold is very high. Like, tomorrow I got to fly, and I'm not going through the scanner no matter what happens. That's my price. But if they made me go through the scanner, then I would reevaluate flying. I would reevaluate my job where I fly a lot, because that's what my price is. And I think everyone's got their price in exchange of privacy. I'm repeating myself. You got the point.
We need to keep in mind that the internet, what it's doing, is the same thing that the printing press did to society. What it did increase the level of communication, and at the same time it made society wiser. So the internet is doing the same thing to society, and this is a good point. It's making us wiser, and we need to be wiser to keep our privacy and to use it. So that's basically it.
I don't know that it makes us wiser. It makes us more knowledgeable potentially. It doesn't seem to me that what people are doing with their knowledge is necessarily better.
I'd like to see instructions complete. I've got a Droid phone. My wife's computer crapped out the other day, and it had to be sent in for repair. I put her email on my phone, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how to get it off the phone.
There was a great quote that I read in some paper somewhere. Actually, I think it was a Linux quote. They come up, the geeky thing, never mind. Anyways, the quote was something like, you know, this guy was saying, for years I've dreamed for the day when the power, you know, my ability to use my phone and my ability to use my computer will be equal. And we've reached that day because now I can no longer use my phone. So, yeah.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for, because you might get it.
All right. Any other questions here? Any other questions? Why don't we open it up for just your thoughts on how cloud computing is going to evolve over the next 10 years, and just hit the high points.
Well, maybe I can be most helpful by just pointing out one thing rather than all of the things that might happen. I think, I was looking for it in your talk, and you sort of hinted at it, but I wanted to put some emphasis on it. The cloud is not just a place to throw storage or to run processes. It also is a way to connect many sensors and devices together. So, Twitter is a way to centralize lots of people's explicit comments, but there are data sensors everywhere that we can be collecting data from. Integrating all that is an interesting sort of cloud thing that I think we will see in a increasing fashion. You can already kind of the idea of the webcam, right? We had that 10 years ago, but now you have sensors that are all over the place. People are starting to buy these things where they, their heart rate monitors and their weight and all these things where you can actually post that to the cloud, and it shows you how much what your bodily functions are. And things you don't really want to even have people know, but they do anyway. So this idea of kind of, and this leads a little bit into the AI and robotics world of a perceptual system that is experiencing inputs from all over the world or even beyond, and bringing that all together into some kind of central access point. I think will be something we see a lot of over the next 10 years if we were looking out a little bit further, versus next year, which might see some more cloud companies start data centers.
I completely agree with that whole pushing events that happen in the real world. One last connection to Twilio. Somebody calls your Twilio number, we hit your web app. Something in the real world is happening, we tie it to the cloud. Imagine if everything could access a web app when something happened. Every time the front door opens, you want to control whether or not that person has access. Why shouldn't a web app be able to determine that that's running on a cloud infrastructure? All these events and making sense of those events and letting anybody control them easily, I think is a huge thing. The other thing I would say is commoditization, which we're starting to get to. Standing Cloud makes that possible, where you can switch between cloud providers without having to re-architect or rebuild your app. You just click a couple buttons. I've tried it, it works great. And I think we'll see more and more of that, and hopefully the providers will settle on something. I wouldn't hold my breath for it, but until then, Dave's in the right business.
I think the thing that excites me most about that whole slide deck was the education aspect. If you've got being able to find, I think that's a parent's most important job, is to find out what your kid is gifted at and what they enjoy, and encourage them down that path, because it all blooms after that. And when we're all able to really delve down deeper into the things that we have an interest in and that we love, I think the world becomes a whole lot more exciting place.
Should have thought about this question a little bit more before I got up here, I think. Let's see. I think the younger generation, they're going to start growing up with much faster connections, and we're starting to see, things are going into the cloud, and the cloud is the cloud washing. Everything is the cloud these days, but it truly will be everything is the cloud one of these days. All of the data will be out there. And it'll just be extremely easy because of the amount of bandwidth and things like that available to everybody to pull it to any device or any computer that you have. And literally anything you want to do, you're not going to need these apps on your machine anymore to do them as much. You can just reach out and do them over the internet.
Okay. I did want to answer, there was a question over here of how education takes place when random people are putting stuff up on the web and other people are quote unquote learning from it. There's an interesting term called cloud accelerated innovation that Chris Anderson, the guy who runs all the TED conferences, is using this phrase. So with the education world, what happens is you create a tagging system that everybody can use, and they can approve or disapprove different learning modules that get posted on the web. And so things get voted down real quickly if they got a lot of crap in them. And so that's how you, if you actually had some sort of a truth meter up and you had to go through and validate 100% of everything being taught in schools today, a lot of things today would not stand up to that test. And so, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us tonight. Let's give them a big round of applause.